Hello, in this video I'm going to be looking at the new season tank, the Destiny. So, first things first, I know I haven't done an MBTB video, but that is because the tank was credited to press accounts basically 2 days before the event ended, which was a terrible time, and then I just haven't done a review since then. So yes, I do know, but yeah, that is why it's not happened yet. I do know about it though. But anyway, Destiny. So this tank, how you get it, basically is from this event screen up in the corner of your garage. You get it on level 2, which costs, I believe, 1,000 or 2,000 boxes to receive, and then once you have received it, you can then navigate to the upgrade screen where you can progress the tank. So how to get the most out of this is, of course, from this screen. If you do it from the event screen here, it's going to cost you 37,000 extra boxes after unlocking the tank to get its fully upgraded modules. But if you do it from this tank upgrade screen, it will only cost you 12,000 additional boxes, which is much cheaper than the 37,000 you would otherwise have to pay. So once you accumulate boxes from whatever you're doing in game, from your clan missions, from rating battles, from tournaments, you know, all of that, even buying gold and stuff, come to this screen. Don't go to the event screen to upgrade it, as it will just be much cheaper. And considering this tank isn't, well, super strong, you definitely want to have it as upgraded as you can. Remember, this event, this season only lasts for 2 months instead of the usual 3, with only this one tank instead of the usual 3. But yeah, the Destiny. This is I'd say, decent tank. It has great armor for what it is. It has great mobility in most aspects, but unfortunately its gun isn't great. In fact, it's pretty bad, with terrible aim time, pretty average gun handling, poor accuracy, terrible DPM, and abysmal HESH penetration. 170 is more like what you would get in tier 8, let alone tier 9. If you are comparing this to other tanks that are similar, you can look at the Conqueror, which has also got 170mm of HESH, but the difference is this is free HESH. The Conqueror has got a premium round of APCR. The Chieftain has 200mm of premium HESH, and unlike the Destiny, the Chieftain actually has decent gun handling. It's got good shell velocity, it's got good DPM as well, while the Destiny, it has just bad gun handling and bad DPM, which is unfortunate, combined with, of course, bad HESH penetration. But the tank overall is pretty good, and I will get right into its stats. So, there is, of course, a review on my website if you want to check that out, with all the stats and everything, and you don't have to listen to me talking about it. But yeah, so the armor. Interesting thing about this tank is that its upper and lower plates are both auto ricochet angles, which is pretty rare for a vehicle to have auto ricochet lower plate. But you can see this here. Of course, the upper plate isn't going to show as auto ricochet because in Blitz kit, the tank view is taken very close up, so it doesn't look like, well, armor is worse basically because of the close range. But here you can see upper plate, very strong auto ricochet angle, and the lower plate as well, an auto ricochet angle. But the thicknesses of these two are also actually pretty decent, with the lower plate being able to bounce some lower penetration tier 8 tanks, and of course the upper plate being very strong even against most heat ammo, as it would be 370mm and higher. Other than this though, you can see that the turret has a small weak point under the gun and no cupolas whatsoever, but if you do turn the turret, you can see that it does become weak on the cheeks. Other than this, you can see the overall weak points of the tank. There is only the one that's under the gun, and of course this bar along the front of the tank. Don't aim for the lower plate, even though it doesn't look like it is a ricochet. it will bounce just because of the angle it's at. Aim for the mid bar where the lights are. This is only between 70 and 120 millimeters thick, meaning yes, HESH and even some high penetration HE can go right through. Of course, when you do turn the tank, the further end of this sort of area under that bar does become a bit stronger, but then of course, due to the angle of that, it means you can't side scrape very well, which is evident when you turn the hull. However, its hull side armor is actually pretty decent and you can bounce off it. When you switch to heat, you can see sort of what heat does, which is ignore the auto ricochet angle of the lower plate and make it penetrable for you to go through. However, it doesn't do anything to the turret, which is already extremely strong, and of course that weak point under the gun is still weak. But you can see, basically, to penetrate the lower plate reliably, use heat or an ammo that won't ricochet at 70 degrees, because that is what is causing that lower plate to be strong. And of course, using Blitz kit, you can see the same here. The purple being an auto ricochet angle, it disappears with heat. Whoops. But yeah, that is the armor of the Destiny. You can see it is actually quite good because it only has two weak points, that mid bar and the area under the gun. So reliable armor against all tanks that you face, really. This tank, though, with its gun, it has a 120mm gun, 3 types of ammo, which are all pretty important. The first type being AP. This is your primary ammo in battle just because the HESH penetration is very bad. Penetration is 245 or 265 with calibrated. DPM is 2250, which is absolutely terrible for 410 alpha damage. But of course you have the HESH, which is why it's got such bad DPM, and a long reload of almost 11. With HESH, damage is 460, very similar to other tanks of this tier, having 128 or 130mm guns, but your penetration is a terrible 170. So compared to other tanks, that is very bad, because at tier 9, most of the tanks have around 190 to 200mm of HESH penetration. Meanwhile, this one has 170. Not going to count the BZ68 for this, just because that has big alpha to trade with, and is sort of not the kind of gun that is similar to this. But DPM with HESH is actually a pretty good 2500, or with calibrated 2400, still pretty decent, but not as special. Of course, the reload time is the same. On HE, your damage is 530, and for 410 alpha, that is actually really nice HE damage. Penetration is 65, that's also pretty good, and DPM is almost 3000, which is not great considering it's HE, but again, it's not terrible. So other stats, aim time 4.4, very bad for 410 alpha damage. That is not good aim time at all. Even compared to 460 alpha damage guns, that is still pretty bad. The base aim time is 2.7, again that is very bad. It's sort of much worse than the other 120mm guns at this tier, and it is even worse than many 130mm guns. Dispersion 0.353, again it's pretty bad. It's only better than some of the more inaccurate 128 and 130mm guns, such as the WZ-114 or the E75. Gun handling is actually pretty average, pretty decent. It is not terrible on that aspect, but it kind of needs to be better than average when you've got such bad aim time and such mediocre dispersion. Gun depression is 6, which isn't the worst, especially when you consider this tank is actually a really small heavy tank compared to other vehicles. But again, 6 degrees makes it quite awkward to use. So overall, an unimpressive gun. Despite having good alpha damage with HESH, its penetration is so low, even with calibrated shells. It's such bad penetration. It comes nowhere close to something like the Cobra or the Conway, which both also have HESH. And if you use calibrated shells, even with HESH, your DPM isn't impressive, your reload isn't impressive, and you've still got terrible penetration compared to other tanks with 460 alpha. For 410 alpha, your DPM is insanely bad. 2200 is just terrible. Penetration is actually not bad, it's fine. But again, just no real redeeming factors for this gun. It's lucky that it has such good armor and good mobility to prop it up. In terms of mobility, it does go 42 forwards, which is pretty quick, very nice. 10 in reverse, which is absolutely terrible. It is the worst in tier 9 and I think in the game. The only tank as bad as this is the TL7, which, as we all know, has terrible reverse speed. The traverse speed is 43 degrees per second on hard terrain and 33 on medium. Both are pretty good for a heavy tank. Acceleration rate is 15.5. This tank only weighs 50 tons, so it's not super heavy, but it's not light either. Its actual acceleration is the same, 15.5 on hard terrain and a decent 12 on medium. So this mobility overall is good. The only downside is that 10 km per hour reverse speed. If it was 15, it would be great mobility in all aspects, but unfortunately the 10 km per hour is very awkward. It does hold this back a fair bit in certain situations. So, in terms of consumables, you do actually have a bit of a choice on this tank, and I have tried out the different combinations you can use. So, of course, there is the usual adrenaline for all tanks. It has reactive armor and it has tungsten shells. There's 3 combinations for using all 3. Of course, you could drop one of these for an extra repair kit if you wanted to. I personally don't, because I found its modules to be okay in my experience. But the first one, first setup being adrenaline with tungsten. So what this would achieve is basically sort of balancing out the weakness of this tank, which is its gun. It's got bad DPM, its standard damage, shell damage isn't that impressive at 410, so tungsten kind of helps to balance that out and give you higher alpha damage on your AP. Of course, with how hard HESH is to use, just because of its terrible penetration, it does help to have that higher damage on AP. But also, when you can get in HESH and HE shells with tungsten, it does do tons of damage, which is very nice. The adrenaline helps to balance out your terrible reload, which of course is always good. Another option to use is this, which is adrenaline with reactive armor. This is sort of a more all-round setup. It helps to maximize on this tank's good durability with its armor and good HP. And of course, reactive will let you absorb more damage and let you survive a lot longer in battle. It is actually very noticeable on this tank. I tried it out in quite a few games. It's just not my personal preference. Of course, adrenaline helping you to balance out your terrible DPM and reload. Helps in brawl situations a lot. And then of course the final one, which is sort of min-maxing on what this tank is good at. You don't have adrenaline to balance out your terrible reload, and you definitely notice that. But you do have the tungsten shells to give you that high alpha damage punch, which is great, of course. It always feels good to be using tungsten. And of course you've got the reactive armor to maximize on your tank's durability. Though my preference, of course, I'm going with adrenaline and tungsten, because having the nicer DPM and damage to balance out this tank's weak gun does, I believe, make the most difference for my playstyle. Of course, with HESH, you want to take a decent amount of HESH, but I wouldn't use it as a sort of primary round, just due to how bad its penetration is. Provisions are very normal on this tank, so there's that. Now, getting to equipment. So with this, you might think I'm a bit crazy using gun rammer on a tank with HESH. However, if you consider what calibrated shells actually does for this tank, you might have to rethink the choice, which is what I did. So on this tank, if you use calibrated shells, it increases your standard penetration from 245 to 265. That's a great increase. However, does it let you penetrate more? Technically yes, but in actuality no, because most armor plates at tier 9 and tier 10 are balanced around the mark of 250 and 300. You might think, oh yeah, well 250, right? This takes you over that 250 mark. Yes, but for lower plates it's a lot less than 250. So you might have some heavy tanks balanced around 250, for example, the turret of a BZ-176, for example, or a BZ-74-1, or a few other less armoured vehicles or less armoured parts of certain tanks. For lower plates, you have more than enough penetration to go through. For cupolas, it's the same thing. 265 isn't going to let you suddenly penetrate through the front of a turret of a certain tank, or the upper plate of a certain tank. Especially not at tiers 9 and 10. In tier 8 it might make a difference, but you don't need the more penetration against tier 8 either, because you're using your great Hesh on the lower plates of the tier 8 tanks. For tier 9 and 10, you generally won't be able to use Hesh unless they have really a terrible lower plate. So next, moving to the Hesh. 184mm of penetration compared to 170. Again, it doesn't do enough for letting you penetrate through just tons of enemy vehicles. The amount of difference that 14mm makes just isn't enough because the base penetration of this Hesh is so low. You're basically forced to shoot at the sides and rears of enemy tanks unless they are in tier 8, where 170 is actually pretty useful. But against tier 9 and 10, it's generally going to be for the sides and rears unless they are a tank with a very bad lower plate. So despite an extra 14mm, which is significant, it doesn't actually give enough effectiveness to the shell, which is already very low penetration. And of course the standard HE 5mm, of course it would be very nice, but unfortunately that's not what we're going to be using calibrated shells for. So go with gun rammer. Gun rammer increases your DPM, which is already absolutely abysmal on this tank. It decreases your reload, which again is also abysmal on this tank. You're generally forced to use AP just because your Hesh penetration is so bad, and that's both with calibrated shells and with gun rammer. Your penetration on Hesh is so bad that you cannot use it in the majority of head-on engagements. That's from experience. That's not me just spouting off nonsense. That's genuinely how it is with this tank's terrible penetration. But that's why I would use gun rammer. If you do want to use calibrated shells, go ahead. It does technically give you more penetration. I would say, though, gun rammer is the better choice for this tank, as crazy as it sounds. Next, defense system, of course, because improved modules is useless. Improved optics, because this isn't a tank destroyer. And engine accelerator, because this tank has perfectly fine traverse speed, and its acceleration, while nice, isn't anything super impressive on medium terrain, so I'm going to go with that. Improved assembly, just for the reason that this tank, its armor is mainly based on auto ricochet angles, so you can see that against heat, which is a ton of penetration increase, the armor barely changes, so there really isn't much point using enhanced armor, and of course it's not going to make enough of a difference on the lower plate, which is only around 220 to 240 millimeters of thickness. So use improved assembly just because most of this tank's armor is based on auto ricochet angles and is already very strong. Gun lane drive, just because this tank, its shell velocity is pretty decent already. I'm not exactly 100% sure what it is. I can check that right now. Yeah, 960 on AP, 790 on Hesh. Hesh, not the best, but it is still decent enough. And this tank, with its abysmal base aim time, definitely needs the gun lane drive. For me, I'm going with vertical stabilizer just because I want to improve that aim time. I hate having bad aim time. That is my personal preference. But refined gun can also be good just because this tank doesn't have great dispersion either. But again, vertical stabilizer, my personal preference. Toolbox and consumable delivery system for my setup. I will say if you are using reactive armor, you might want to consider using high-end consumables just because reactive armor's duration is a very short 10 seconds. So, getting into some gameplay, I believe I have 3 or 4 replays to show. So, the first one on Mine Ruins. In this game I am using calibrated shells, which you'll see doesn't make any difference for this battle in particular, but also for other battles where I did play against higher tier or stronger armoured tanks, it also didn't make a difference at all. You can also see trying out a different consumable setup with tungsten and reactive in this battle. So here you'll see I'm going to the mid, sort of usual position for a heavy tank, I guess. But seeing as a lot of my team has gone to the right, I'm considering falling back and pushing down that way. You can see there I do get a nice shot, but I did have to aim in quite a bit because of this tank's gun handling. Seeing tanks off to the right, I do decide I might try and push forward, as I do also have support there. I decide to go for the Destiny in this case, and not the AMX. I'm not too sure why I did, but I did. But you can see I've already bounced 2 shots due to this tank's pretty troll armor, which is quite nice. I do come round the corner and take a shot from that Destiny. He tried to hesh my side, but this tank's sides are fully covered in a 20mm spaced side skirt, so you can't hesh this tank's side. Unfortunately, I did bounce off, I believe, the gun mantlet of that LT-432. So, yeah, no damage there. Seeing the LT come back, I'm going to shoot him with AP. I'm not going to use Hesh because his sides are also covered in spaced armor and tracks, but I do, unfortunately, low roll. So here, I'm going to try kill that AMX. You can see the bad reverse speed here, 10 km/h. Not the worst situation for me to be in, but you can still see how that 10 km is very slow compared to your usual heavy tank with 12 or 15. So here it seems like we're going to lose this game. I do try to go for this LT, but I do miss. He tries to use premium AP on me, but does bounce off. So I'm expecting some tanks to come from the left because their heavies were pushing low. So that's why I'm not exactly going to immediately push out against these medium and light tanks. And there you can see the enemy Destiny is spotted. He is stock, you can tell by having 2000 hit points, and due to his, well, turret without spaced armor. And you will be able to see his sort of armor in a second. But as he is full hit points and there are multiple enemies, I'm not going to push, and it does seem like we are going to lose this battle. So this Kari is getting a little bit impatient, trying to push, but he doesn't, which is a smart play on his part, and here you can see the armor of the enemy Destiny. I am trying to have and watch 3 tanks now though, as there is a Stridsvagn above me, which will appear, yep, there he is. So, a bit of a bad situation for this tank, as it doesn't have the greatest turret traverse either. So now I decide to push down into this dip to get a bit more cover, and you can see the armor of the enemy Destiny. I do activate reactive armor, but luckily the Destiny bounces and the only one who goes through is that Kari. So the reactive did help me to absorb 1 shot there. Not the best battle to show it, but I did put it to good use in some other battles, which I don't think I'm showing in this video. But you can see again, the Destiny bounced off my lower plate, and you can see why you don't turn the turret in this tank, because it is heavily based on the angling and not the thickness. Unfortunately here, with enemies all around me, there's not much I can do, and I am going to go down. But I did just want to show this battle to sort of show the funny armor of the tank, and how you can do a bit of damage despite its terrible DPM, even with calibrated shells on. So 4,000 damage almost, and 2,500 blocked almost. Not a terrible result. So the next battle I'm going to show is on Normandy, another top tier game. You will see I have spawned on the lower part, which is where the medium tanks usually go, so I'm going to try use this tank's good mobility to get to the upper part of this map. So in this battle I've checked the enemy lineup, and there is a Destiny, an AMX-50 120 and a Contracaro Mark 1 against us, but seeing the Contracaro over there makes me a bit more confident to push this upper area, as the AMX-50 120 has no armor and the Destiny is probably stock, as was probably the case for a lot of you playing battles yesterday, as this tank was released. So seeing that the Contracaro is towards the middle, I've decided I'm just going to push in. Unfortunately I do take a shot from the Chimera, but due to this tank's good armor I'm pretty confident that I'll be able to put in a shot or two against this AMX. You can see there, despite being able to penetrate Hesh, I didn't bother because this tank has horrible aim time. I'd rather just activate Tungsten and Adrenaline and just do the damage quickly. You might say it's lazy aim on my part, and yes, it absolutely is. So the T-49 here, I unfortunately do use Hesh. I should have used HE, really, but still, damage dealt. In this battle, though, it's really not so much about using the armor and mobility or anything, but just being able to actually get the damage out, despite this tank having really pretty bad gun for what it is. But you can see 2,000 damage dealt here, getting a nice Hesh penetration into that Chimera, and now having the side of the Jagdtiger. We've damaged them. Again, unfortunately I wasn't paying attention, made a bit of a bad play there, taking 2 shots in the side, but now I have pulled back. I'm going to be able to secure a kill at AMX. So here you can see a bit of the issue with the reload. If I had a sort of normal reload time for tier 9 on 9.5 seconds or something, I would have been able to get an extra shot into that CC Mark 1, but unfortunately this tank with 11 seconds isn't quite able to do the sort of things other tanks can. So there you can see a nice max roll on the Hesh, and now I'm going to try and go for this Contracaro. Unfortunately, I do miss, hitting the side skirt, doing 160 damage. However, again, not 100% rushed aim there. This tank does just have pretty bad gun handle. But it was a bit of an unfortunate shot. So 3,800 damage in not the longest of replays. Again, showing that this tank can actually farm up the damage when it needs to in the right situations. So again, not the worst result. 70,000 credits without a booster. Pretty decent for a season tank, especially one you get for free. So next, I believe, is this battle on Dead Rail. So this battle is interesting. Just before it starts, look at the team lineups. So for my team, actually I'm not going to look at my team, it doesn't matter. For the enemy team, look at the Badger, the Jagdpanzer E100, the Kranvang, the Rinoceronte, the Progetto 66, and the Type 68. Those 6 tanks are all extremely well armoured on some part of their tank. For the Badger, it's basically the whole front. For the Jagdpanzer, it's everywhere but the lower plate. The Kranvang can easily go hull down and have just impenetrable armour in the middle. Same for the Rinoceronte, and same for the Progetto 66 and Type 68. So I'm not going to go to the middle. Well, I'm not going to go to that ridge where heavy tanks usually go on the middle part of the map. I'm going to go towards base B and try and get in some side shots as the enemies poke up over that ridge, which you can see them doing here. That's a sort of limitation of this tank. just because you don't have gun depression, you don't have a premium heat or APCR round, you only have HESH. While you do have very nice armor for going hull down, unfortunately you are just held back by bad DPM, bad penetration on HESH without a premium round, and of course quite poor accuracy and gun depression. So here you can see how you might play on a sort of lineup like this, with the enemies being quite well armoured. Getting to their side does work well if they are distracted enough to, well, ignore you. Unfortunately, a stock Progetto 66 is coming up, and I do unfortunately low roll into his lower plate with HESH. He does aim carefully, which is what you should do against this tank, and not rush shots, and he does manage to put in both shots into my tank. So here I'll say I don't make the best play. I do rush a shot on him and causes me to deal no damage. But you can see, again, the armor being a bit lucky there, bouncing the Jagdpanzer E100. And then getting in a nice HESH shot into the lower plate of that Progetto. You can still see I'm doing decent damage. Unfortunately, the highest DPM tank in the game is now rushing me, and that does not bode well for me. You can see there he uses heat, so again, lowering his damage to try and penetrate the lower plate of this tank. Unfortunately, I do die, we do lose this game, but I did just want to show that one for the sort of lineup that you face with this tank, and still being able to show a bit of gameplay. So unfortunately the game did crash, so I'm having to re-record this final battle. But this is against tier 10 tanks, and you will be able to see a bit of a more brawling situation for this tank. So, in this battle, I'm going to go towards the left, which is where the majority of my team does go. And of course, with this tank, with its bad reload, with its poor penetration on HESH, it does need some support from allies to help it, especially against multiple enemies. And that's just due to this tank struggling with its low DPM, and of course if it can't use HESH, then that DPM is going to be even more evident. But here, with two enemies spotted in front of me and no one spotted off to the side, it does seem like these two are isolated, and with basically my entire team over here, I do decide I'm going to try and push forward. In a minute, of course. I don't use HESH there because it was a fairly small penetrable area on the side of that VK, and I instead use the AP to guarantee damage, and there you'll see why you shouldn't really take on-move shots on a tank that has such poor dispersion and aim time. But here against the E4, I do get in a nice HE shot with tungsten shells, doing 600 damage, which is very nice for my damage score. Seeing that a mill there, I do get a bit of tunnel vision, and I do go for him. Probably a bit too aggressively, well, definitely a bit too aggressively, causing me to take 900 damage, which I definitely didn't need to take. You'll see there the bad gun depression, and now the bad reverse speed. Of course, caused by my terrible bad push, but yeah, you can still see those aspects of this tank, despite my bad gameplay there. But here the BZ-68 does push out, so I decide to try use HESH, unfortunately not able to go through the side of him, so I just use AP. The mill luckily bounces off the lower plate, but then makes a good shot into my track. Now the BZ-68 is going to push out and do the same, bounce off the lower plate. I do get a very nice penetration into his track and fuel tank, and then unfortunately the Chieftain with his better dispersion does manage to hit my weak point. So here you can see I'm not really able to reverse away because I only have 10 km/h reverse speed. I do manage to get in one final Hesh shot into the chieftain, and just about managed to reload before this Emil kills me, and this time he's not going to rush his shot, unfortunately taking me out there, but 4,000 damage again. My team will win that one. But in that game you could see sort of the gun depression, the bad reverse speed, but still the good armor of this tank and the good mobility allowing me to get into positions. So in that game I made 80,000 credits, which is definitely not bad, especially without a credit booster, and especially for a free tank again. So Destiny. Stock, this tank is really bad. Just because it's got very bad DPM, very bad alpha damage, very bad accuracy, very bad aim time. It still has decent mobility and armor, but it's just the gun which is the main issue. So when you do get this tank, definitely upgrade it through the module screen and not through the event screen, because you want to try and get this tank as upgraded as you can. This tank overall, not the worst vehicle, but it's not great. I'd say it's pretty average, maybe slightly above average at best, though definitely it is held back by its significant downsides, which are of course bad reverse speed, bad gun depression, and just an overall pretty bad gun. But overall, not a terrible tank, especially for one that is free. It's just kind of unfortunate that there's so many players running around in it which just don't have a clue how to play the vehicle or use the Hesh. But oh well, it is what it is. Wargaming could have definitely released this tank in a definite better method than they did, probably putting the tank closer to the middle or the end of the season event, but well, it is what it is. Overall, not the worst tank, and of course it does look very cool. But that is it for the Destiny. Thanks for watching.